Really loved being in Bali away from the States. My purpose was really to step more into Reiki and healing and heal other people. Like time in Bali and all the work that I did there really helped to open to them. Peaceful, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything being so far away from home.
Open your hands, stand in the light, watch it begin, we're gonna shine.
How's everything in New York now? Like maybe you can tell people here, like I mean from the news it sounds pretty intense. But maybe you can report a little bit from your side, from your end.
Yeah. Well, I'm staying with my family who lives about 45 minutes north of New York City. So I'm not in the city, which is kind of the worst part right now. So where I am, it's a little bit quieter and a little bit calmer, and I'm almost in a bit of a bubble because I'm with my family, hanging out at home. I've been able to kind of relax and catch up on some work stuff and keep it low key. But I did have to go into Brooklyn to take care of a couple things with my apartment. And I've been out of the house a couple times grocery shopping, and that's been pretty intense. Because we are the epicenter here in the States. It actually feels a little bit ironic because 3 weeks ago today, I was getting brunch at Shady Shack with a friend, and we were having a conversation. She was leaving to come back to the States the next day, and I was like, I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna stick it out here, it's gonna be fine. And then 8 hours later, I was on the phone with my visa agent and my family, and then right after that booked a ticket to come home. And I thought it would be safer and better to come home, and I'm glad I'm home with my family for sure. Like, I think it would have been really hard to go through something like this so far away from them, even though I did have a community there. But I kind of flew into the eye of the storm coming back here because it's really intense. Yeah. So like, I went to the grocery store for my family, and because my parents are, older and relatively healthy, but it's better for me to go. And I had, I was wearing like a makeshift mask and gloves and lots of antibacterial, and it was really intense because there were a lot of people around who weren't necessarily following guidelines, and tight quarters, and kind of you'd go into an aisle and someone would be there, so then you kind of felt like you feel like you're battling this invisible enemy, because you just have no idea if I touch something or if I walk past someone. So it's been intense. I feel pretty safe and I'm taking all the precautions, but I think being here also, I'm much more exposed to the news than I was in Bali, and it's kind of there every single day, and it's good to kind of be up on what's going on, but also I'm trying to create healthy boundaries around that and making sure I'm really just watching it once a day for a couple minutes to get updates, because you can really get sucked in. I think that was something that I really loved being in Bali away from the States, where I really wasn't paying attention to the news and everything that was going on here, and it was a lot more peaceful. So it's a little weird, but I feel like I'm in a bubble, so I feel mostly safe just following all the guidelines. How are things there? Oh, sorry.
A little bit to the audience who have just joined us. So Holly here is from New York. I'm talking to her in New York now, but 3 weeks ago she was still in Bali and didn't really think to leave Bali. but things quickly change in the span of one day. I think you really think your parents, your family really thinks you should go back, and in the span of 8 hours you mentioned you booked a ticket home. So it must be really hard for you. And like you're now in New York. Do you really think you should stay in Bali? You reckon?
It's interesting because I keep talking to my friends who are still there, and they're like, yeah, it's, we're kind of stuck at home, but there are worse places to be stuck. Everyone seems to be feeling pretty safe for the most part. And it sounds like, the government there are taking things really seriously, which I think is really good. So, there's definitely a part of me that's like, oh, what if I had stayed? But I think ultimately it's better that I'm with my family right now. I think if I had stayed, it would have been too hard for me. I think emotionally and mentally, to be so far with all this going on.
Was there, do you have any other siblings to take care of your parents there if you are still in Bali, say?
Yeah, I have a younger sister. She's like 2 years younger than me, so she has been here, but she's been kind of around bearing a lot of responsibility. They're in their 60s, but she's definitely taken the brunt of the daughterly duties while I was away. So it just felt right to come back and be with them.
I'm sure it's the best decision, yeah. So Holly, tell us a little bit more about you and your journey in Bali. You were in Bali. You've been in Bali for how long? 6 months, I think.
6 months.
Yeah. So I think we would love to know about that story of yours.
Yeah. So I'm from New York originally, and after I graduated college, I was working in advertising for 10 years in New York City, kind of climbing the corporate ladder. And I'd gotten to a point about a year ago, actually, where I knew that I wanted to make a change. I wanted to make a career shift. I was feeling called to a different type of work. I was doing a lot of kind of spiritual, personal work, and I was getting my Reiki certification and feeling really called to stepping into becoming a healer and working with people. And I felt like there was more work for me to do, but I needed to get away from the city in order to have a little bit more space and perspective, and almost like I felt like working in the city and living there for so many years, I was holding on to so much tension in my body. It was almost when you like take a deep breath and you're just like holding your breath for so long, and I felt like I needed to go somewhere where I could exhale, somewhere warm near the beach. And I wasn't sure where that was going to be, and I had a bit of a timeline in my head about when I would quit and leave New York. And around the time that I had really started getting more serious about it, I got an invitation to a friend's wedding in Bali, and I'd always wanted to go to Bali. I'd never been before. And so it was around the time that I was thinking about quitting and leaving New York. And so initially I bought a ticket, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll stay for a couple months. And then I ended up changing my ticket to indefinitely. So I flew out to Bali for this wedding. First time I'd ever been to I'd never been to Asia ever before. Never been to Asia. Yeah. And I came for the wedding. was there for the first 2 weeks. I would say about 2 weeks was mostly like some wedding stuff and some friends and new wedding friends. And then, it got to the day where everyone left and I was still in Bali alone. And I stayed and I loved it. I think even from the moment getting there for the wedding, I didn't necessarily, there were some moments where I was a little bit like, oh man, everyone's leaving, I'm going to be so sad. But I felt, there was something about Bali that I just felt at home and I felt really safe and really just kind of like welcomed by the Balinese people and the expat community there. And I knew I was in the right place for what I was looking for.
It was the perfect invitation, your friend's wedding, perfect invitation.
Yeah, it was. I was like, you guys literally changed my life, so thank you. If you weren't getting married, who knows, I might still be in New York. So, yeah. Yeah.
So that your friend's wedding invitation, that came around the time that you were thinking to quit your job and just have a bit of a break and thinking of the next step of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And how was it like your work in advertising? Like, I'm sure it's long hours, a lot of...
Yeah. It's high. It was high pressure. I was working for, throughout the 10 years, I was working for some pretty big name clients and at some pretty big name agencies. So there was definitely a lot of pressure. It's kind of funny because in my experience in advertising, we'd always like, when things would get really intense, we'd make these jokes like, okay, we're not saving lives. It's not brain surgery. Like, we're not doctors. But at the same time, you're working on campaigns that your clients are putting millions of dollars into, and it was a lot of pressure, and it could get really intense and late hours. And there were definitely several moments in my career where I had to pull all-nighters. There were a couple times I had to sleep at the office earlier on in my career. And I would say the hours maybe got a little bit better as I got more senior, but the pressure just shifted in a different way. And I think, towards there were moments towards the end where like I felt like I was good at my job and I got good feedback, but my heart just wasn't in it. I didn't feel like this was my ultimate purpose or calling in life. But yeah, it was intense, long hours, and I think the advertising industry plus New York City and the pressure and intensity of living in New York City was just kind of like the perfect pressure cooker almost for me.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
That is like intense life for like the past 10 years for you, and you've never really had a break, like a really nice break to just like go away somewhere quiet and nice, isn't it? It's always just only short breaks for you.
Yeah, I think the longest vacation I took was like maybe 10 days. I don't think I ever took a 2-week vacation. I don't think. In 10 years. Yeah.
So tell me, once you got into Bali and you were mentioning about you got into this spiritual healing thing in your life that you started to do, I think just before you quit or something like that?
Yeah, so it was actually about a year ago. So I grew up in a very like spiritual household, and my grandmother had this like new age crystal shop that we used to visit, and she would have like guest speakers, and I think Deepak Chopra was a guest speaker once, and like tarot card readers, and this was like back in the 80s and 90s, so she was a bit ahead of her time, and she was I think an acupuncturist and an herbalist, and I grew up doing all like natural remedies, and my mom would take us to like full moon women's circles, and so I grew up in this really like kind of spiritual hippie space, but at the same time my parents both had these corporate careers, and I grew up in a kind of like upper middle class suburb of New York City, so it was the 90s and early 2000s, and it wasn't necessarily mainstream, so I would kind of hide that part of myself from my friends and people at school, but I always felt at home in those spaces. And then I think I still kind of resisted it for a really long time, but it was when I kind of got to a point in my career, and also I think in a lot of like my personal relationships, and I was in a handful of years ago I was in a pretty like toxic romantic relationship, and I just felt stuck, and I knew I needed a change, and I tried all these different things, and then I was like, okay, I need to look a little bit further inward, and so I started working with this woman, Nina Endhurst, who became my mentor, and started doing a lot of this kind of like deeper spiritual work, and looking at some of my, past traumas and things that I hadn't addressed. And through that, I really started stepping into this spiritual space, and I was going to a friend who was a Reiki practitioner, and I was getting Reiki treatments from her, and that's Reiki is like an energetic healing that works on balancing the energy in your body, mostly focusing on chakras, but it can really help release like physical stuff, emotional stuff, mental, spiritual, lots of different stuff. And so I had a couple different sessions where a lot of things opened up for me, and I had one session in particular where I just got like a very clear message that my purpose was really to step more into Reiki and healing, and look into how I can help heal other people through the work that I had been doing on myself. So then I got trained in Reiki here in New York. And I was continuing to do a lot of that work, but I wasn't necessarily taking on clients. I was mostly just like doing sessions with friends and working with different people. And then when I got to Bali, I was still kind of taking a pause. I think when I first got there, I was like, oh, I need to jump in and like launch my website. And then I was like, no, that's the New Yorker, and you need to like you came here to like take a moment to breathe. And I did that, and then I would say probably in January I started taking on clients, and my sessions were just like completely different from any other sessions that I had given before. And I feel like a lot of that is a result of just being in Bali and the work that I continued to do on myself, and the people that I met, and some of the other healers that I met there. There's definitely something really special about that place. Like, I think there's a reason why so many people are attracted to Bali. And for me, when I was telling people, oh, I'm going to Bali, I'm going to be there for a couple months, maybe longer, a lot of people would ask like, oh, are you going to Ubud? Because that's known as like the spiritual center Mecca in Bali. But for me, I was really like resistant to it because I felt like I needed to be near the ocean. But also I think I didn't want to necessarily get sucked into the more commercialized side of, I think sometimes there are healers that are a little bit more driven by ego as opposed to driven by this like innate calling to want to like really help people. And that was kind of like the sense I got and the experience I got with certain people in Ubud. I mean, I've spent a lot of time there, and I think that there are some really lovely people there and really great things up in Ubud, but I just felt much more at home in Canggu.
In Canggu, yes. So for people who just joined us, if you have any questions, please leave comments, or you can send a question. But Holly here, she's from New York. She's been working in advertising, big companies, climbing the corporate ladder for 10 years, and then she got invited to a wedding last October 2019 to Bali. And it's just the perfect time when she was thinking of having a long break from her usual life routine. So well done. And Holly is now into like Reiki healer, spiritual healing, and I think you also mentioned about you being a medium. That will be
yeah. So my oh, sorry, I just missed what. Can you repeat that? You just cut out for a second. Yeah. So that. Yeah, it's something that I think I would always have like certain dreams or certain feelings or senses about things, and then they might happen, but it was never anything big. It was like little mini things that I would dream about and it would happen a couple days later, or I would sense something about someone or relationships, and I might be right. And so I would always joke around like, oh, I'm psychic. And I definitely felt kind of a connection, but I didn't necessarily tap those gifts. And I actually truly believe that we're all psychic. We all have the ability to tap into that. And it's just a matter of kind of like how open you are to it. And so when I started working with my mentor last year, I was also doing this other program with this medium, Nikki Novo, to try and tap into some of those gifts. And I could feel things coming, but I was definitely feeling stuck. And it wasn't until my time in Bali that things really started to open up. And what I realized through the Reiki sessions that I was giving is I would kind of sit, and Reiki is typically hands-on, and so I would start working on, going into a session being like, okay, I'm going to balance this person's energy and see what comes up. And I just started getting completely bombarded with messages, and past loved ones would show up, and lots of crazy things started coming to me. And at first I was kind of like, oh, this is weird. Like, why am I seeing this? Why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling this? Like, this is so weird. And then at the end of the session, when I was done with the hands-on part, I would start kind of telling the client what I was seeing or feeling, walking them through some of the messages that I got and almost my interpretation of them, and realized that what I was doing was channeling. So it was really through this work and through my time in Bali and whatever I was doing there, and all the work that I did there really helped to, I think, open me up to these gifts that I think were always there, but I just wasn't as open to them before.
These gifts that I think were always there, but I wasn't as open to them.
That's right.
Before.
So it's like Bali helped you to step into these gifts that you have, like that that it opens you up to realize that you do have this gift of being a medium, channeling through different world, and Bali is
the island of the gods,
very spiritual island, right? Maybe that's something that
the island of the gods.
Yeah, that's right. So that's very interesting. So we have a question here. Let's check it out. Wait. All right. I'll bring it up. From Audience A. How do Reiki healing change your life?
For me, personally, you know, I think Reiki can be really powerful, and it depends on the practitioner that you work with also. But for me personally, it completely changed my life. It was through Reiki that I got a lot of clarity around certain past traumas that I was holding on to from childhood as well as adulthood that I needed to let go of or work through, that I didn't realize I was still holding on to. It was through Reiki that I got some really clear messages around what my purpose is in life. It was through Reiki that I actually saw a lot of physical changes in my body and a lot of kind of recurring injuries and things that were happening that I was holding on to, that I think were a result of, it was a lot of chronic things that were showing up in my body that I think were a result of deeper kind of like emotional things that I was holding on to. Emotional trauma that I was able to help heal and release. So it's been a really powerful tool for me. And I've seen some really powerful results in some of the clients that I've worked with as well. But I think it also depends on the person and how open you are to it. Because I've definitely worked with some people who aren't necessarily as open, and it still works. Like the energy still goes where it needs to go. But those sessions maybe look a little bit different than sessions with people who are a little bit more open.
Right. Now, can you tell us, like, just briefly, what does a typical Reiki session looks like? Like, what do you actually do? I know that it's like a physical thing that actually clearing up the emotional part of yourself as well. But I think most of us really have no idea what this Reiki thing is about. Just a briefly typical.
Every Reiki practitioner works. So every Reiki practitioner works differently. It's actually interesting because I had a couple different clients who were like, oh, you work hands-on? Like, there are some Reiki healers who work hands-off. And now that I'm back in New York and in quarantine, I actually have been offering virtual sessions, so like through FaceTime like this. So it's still completely possible to work hands-off. But if I'm with someone physically in person, I'm hands-on. I can only speak to the way that I work. So I actually call my sessions Reiki readings because it's like part Reiki energy work and then part almost psychic medium reading. So I will typically meet with a client, like we'll sit down, we'll spend a couple minutes talking about if there's anything that they want me to focus on in the session, whether it's physical, emotional, if there's anything that they're looking for clarity on, anything that they want to work through. So we'll have a quick chat about that. And then depending on how long they book a session for, we'll spend a good chunk of time with them just lying down, relaxing. It's almost like I've had some people go to sleep. It's kind of like you're just relaxing, lying there. I put music on and I go where I'm guided to go. So I typically work from the head down, but a lot of times I'll jump around to different parts of your body, and my hands are on usually over the main chakras, but I'll also work with some of the smaller chakras or other parts of the body that it just feels like need the energy either to flow more towards or to release from. And during that time, some people might feel like warm sensations. Some people might feel tingling. You might feel different sensations in your body. You might also get certain messages yourself. So I had a client a couple days ago, and we were working over video. She was in Canada, I believe, and she was lying in her bed. I was kind of working on her in my mind's eye, energetically, and at the end of the session, she was feeling a lot of things around her legs, and she was also getting a lot of random, she was like, so many random memories from my childhood, but they actually weren't random. They were memories that were helping to remind her of, I think there were two different things. One was a trauma that I don't think she realized she was holding on to, and that was a trauma and that needed more work. And then another was like a really lovely, beautiful memory of a past loved one. And there were some things going on with her roots. She was feeling like her feet were really heavy, and so while I'm working, sometimes I might see similar things or feel similar things. A lot of time I'll see lots of different things, and so I was kind of getting messages and seeing things and feeling things. And then once I felt like her energy was balanced and I was able to kind of remove a lot of the energetic blockages, then I kind of let her come up and we had a conversation, kind of brought her back into her body, and we had a conversation where she told me a little bit about what she saw and felt, and then I kind of gave her the reading part of it, where I walked her through what I saw, the messages that came through for her, what I removed, and recommendations of what it felt like she really needed to kind of continue to work on her end to help with the extend and expand the healing.
Really different type of things that you're doing from your previous career in advertising industry, and now you're doing this
very different,
like alternative remedy. That's just completely different, but
yeah, very different. Not fully what I expect. I had an idea of what I wanted to step into, but I had no idea it was.
So I would love to talk more about Bali. Was there like an aha moment when you are here that really makes you feel, oh, this is it, this is my home, I should stay here? I
don't know if there was like one particular moment. I think it was really just like when I got there and was meeting the people I was meeting, and just everywhere I went I felt safe and embraced and welcomed, and I just really loved the lifestyle. Don't get me wrong, there were I definitely had a lot of challenges especially at the beginning. I crashed my motorbike the first time I tried to drive it, and I was okay. I just got a little scraped up, nothing major. That happened. There were a couple other things like that where, I think there's this saying that Bali will either suck you in or spit you out, and it really tends to confront you with maybe certain things that you've been ignoring for a really long time, almost like this weird test. And at first I was super frustrated, and then I just kind of surrendered to it, and everything started going well. But for me, it was really just being able to, I loved the freedom of being on my bike. I loved everyone I met. I loved being able to go to the beach every single day. It was just easy and peaceful, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything being so far away from home. Like there was something about it that I just felt at home there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's what we are hearing from people who decided to live in Bali. So it's definitely, you don't miss home, and that's great. You know, it's so far away from New York.
So far,
It's so far. Yes. Unbelievable, but and you feel home here. That's really great. And let's check out if there's any other question. If not, I'm gonna close. There's no question, and I'm gonna close probably with my last question.
Okay.
Well, maybe if there's like a life lesson you can share, being in Bali for a few months, maybe you can share with us. If you get anything from it, so
From like a life lesson specifically to Bali and like, or just in general, like
yes, or just in general, or maybe life lesson that you get from being in Bali, or just from your life in general. Yes.
Well, I think being in Bali for me, I would say like two big takeaways. One, don't be afraid to take the leap. Like I think this was something I thought about for a really long time, and I definitely, when I decided I was going to do it, I planned, I saved up money, I got everything I needed to in order, but that don't be afraid to take the leap. Like you can make it happen. Where there's a will, there's a way, and it's worth it. And also I think from being in Bali, like for me, just kind of falling in love with the local community and culture. And now that I'm back in New York, being even more grateful for that community and culture of both locals and expats, and almost wishing that I had enmeshed myself a little bit more in the local community. So if you are traveling, like spending a long period of time in a new country or in Bali, like make an effort to learn a little bit of the local language, like make some local friends. Like that wasn't necessarily something that I think I did enough of. I had always, wanted to, and was like, okay, this is gonna happen, and then all of a sudden within 8 hours I was like, oh, I'm on a flight. So don't be afraid to take the leap and take advantage of where you are, but in a way where you're also, there needs to be like a give and take, like taking, but also like receiving, but also giving back to where you are.
Holly, thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed it. Yes. All right.
Me too.
Bye for now.